From the Columbia University Language Resource Center, this is Said and Done, the podcast about languages and the people who speak them. This is Said and Done. I'm Chris Kaiser, and joining me is Wesley Doucette, who's a Ph.D. student at the CUNY Graduate Center in the French Doctoral Program. In this conversation, Wesley talks about his long-standing interest in studying both French and Turkish. We discuss what it was like to learn Turkish at Columbia through an interinstitutional partnership called the Inter-University Doctoral Consortium. He shares his views on the benefits of studying a less commonly taught language, what was easy and what was difficult about learning Turkish, and finally, his experiences with learning Ottoman Turkish at Columbia in addition to Modern Turkish. Here's my conversation with Wesley Doucette. Wesley Doucette, thank you so much for joining me today. You are a PhD student at CUNY Graduate Center, and you also teach French at Hunter College and at Baruch College. And you have a particular interest in two languages, in French and in Turkish. And so my first question is, can you talk about how you gained an interest in these two languages? What's the origin of your interest in French and Turkish?
So, French really began in undergrad. I started taking French in undergrad, and a lot of it was a question of literature. I really enjoyed French writers. I really enjoyed the idea of reading stuff in French. And in a weird way, at the time, I grew up in Pittsburgh. And so at the time, there was sort of this rebellious thing about learning French in suburban Pittsburgh. It was, they're the ones who were against the Iraq War. Like that was still kind of part of the conversation. So there was this side to it that I kind of found energizing. And then I just really loved how much the French appreciated the attempt to speak the language and to learn the language. And then as for Turkish, that's actually a much more direct line. My best friend growing up was Turkish. Came to Turkey twice with her, and I just fell in love with it. So when I began my PhD program, they told me I had to choose a third language. My initial response was German. But when I thought about the resources available to me in New York City, the opportunity available to me, I figured certain languages I could probably do on my own time, but to learn something a little bit more specific, a little bit more niche like Turkish, it's now or never. So, never look back.
Gotcha. So when you decided to learn Turkish, how much had you already studied French? How much French did you know at that point, and how long had you studied it?
Okay, so I started French in undergrad. I then more or less abandoned it after study abroad. And then I came back to it when I did my master's in Avignon, did my master's in theater at Avignon Université. And that's really where my French developed. Came back to the city, and then I only started Turkish when I started my PhD program a couple years after. So by the time I was starting Turkish, I had been doing French for about a decade by then.
You know, some people say that if you've studied one language, that kind of lays a foundation for being a better language learner, even if it's a totally different language. Did you find that was the case for you when you started learning Turkish, which I guess is a much more difficult language to learn than French is for an English speaker?
There, it is a little bit six of one, half a dozen of the other when it comes to difficulty in a lot of ways. They each have their gives and takes. First of all, absolutely. It is so much easier that each language you add does become significantly more easy in my experience, just because you know the questions to ask. And, when you're studying a language, you plateau a lot. And you're not sure when this is going to end. You don't know if this is it, if this is as good as it gets. And to have experienced that previously, so when you hit these plateaus in your language learning, the next time around, you can think to yourself, oh, I've been here before. I remember being bad at this for a while. So that it's not as frustrating, I find. And again, the most important thing is just you know what questions to ask. You know what works for you to learn the language by then.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying that you kind of can manage the psychological aspects of learning a language better the second time around.
Yeah, yeah, and it just you're used to being in that uncomfortable place where you're not 100% sure what to say, and you're used to that sort of sense of vulnerability that puts you in. I tell my students, I'm like, just be prepared that you are going to sound like Tommy Pickles from the Rugrats for a couple of years here. And that's just the gig. And everyone's gonna be patient with you. Everyone's gonna be very nice about it. They're gonna be very sweet to you. But the level that you're giving out in English, you're not gonna be able to give out in any foreign language for a while, and that's normal.
Yeah,
So just
absolutely.
be patient with yourself. It takes time.
Absolutely. So can you go into a little greater detail about that time period when you were realizing that you could take Turkish here at Columbia through an exchange between Columbia and the other doctoral institutions in New York City? You know, what were you thinking, and also maybe walk us through like the first couple days of taking the class.
Absolutely. So in New York City, we have what's called the IUDC. You can take courses if you're a PhD student. You can take courses at any participating IUDC members, as long as that particular course is not offered at your school. For example, if I were an NYU student, I couldn't take this Columbia class because NYU offers a Turkish program. Um, you just have to have a stomach for paperwork. It's a lot of signing stuff. It's a lot of paperwork, sending stuff back and forth. If you're not scared of that, and if you're at one of these schools, I do suggest it, generally speaking. So everyone was very kind, worked pretty quickly, um, and I ended up taking a full 2 years of Turkish at Columbia and 1 year of Ottoman actually at Columbia as well. But that experience of coming in those first 2 days, uh, it was a very different environment than the French environment. A very, very different environment. Um, the French environment, and it's not so much a question of the language. It's when you're going into one of these more niche languages, and I keep using that term, and I'm sorry about that, but it's the only way I can really phrase it in my mind, is everyone there means to learn this language. And so what I experienced as a teacher of French and also as previous life a student of French is you get a lot of, I mean, I don't want to call it cynical. It's just, you have a language requirement. This seems easy enough. You know how to get through a cafe conversation, fine. And everyone has the level that they're trying to reach. But when I entered that Turkish, and they're huge, right? Those French classes can be 30 people strong or larger. I entered this class and it's a dozen people, less, 8 people, very small. You learn everyone's name day one. You're talking to everybody. Everyone's coming from a completely different background, completely different research interests, and we're all here for the same goal. And we're all also here to help each other get to that same goal. Now, my professor, Zoreya Hoja, uh, really set the tone that first day in a really wonderful way, where she let us know that we are there to learn, we are there to talk, we are there to make mistakes, and we are there to mostly communicate in Turkish starting day one. Uh, but walking in, I mean, it was intimidating. It was very intimidating, especially since I didn't speak literally one word of Turkish walking in that day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think you made a very good point, which is that when you take a niche language, or sometimes they call them a less commonly taught language, you get a degree of attention, personalized attention, I think, that you might not get in a larger language class. And also that the people who are taking those classes, nobody's there by accident. You know, there's a degree of and it's nice, it's wonderful to be in a class of people who are motivated and pushing you as well. Did you find that the other students, in because they were highly motivated, also helped you push along in different
Absolutely,
ways?
absolutely. And it was such a, I mean, for all of us, a very vulnerable place because something else that I see a lot in my French classes, I hear about in Spanish classes, you do get a lot of native speakers
Mm,
who, and I teach these students, and I'm happy to have them. You can never have too much of the basics, whatever, but it definitely creates this sort of tier system within the classroom. Native speakers, speakers who have taken several years of French and all that, or brand new, and all of them are in the same classroom together. That first day, Zulea Hoja went through the classroom and she was like, Merhaba, nasılsınız? Hello, how are you? And I remember one young woman responded, İyiyim, siz nasılsınız? And they had a full little conversation, and Zulea Hoja goes, wonderful. So my intermediate class is at this time, at this hour, and I'm happy to see you there, but this is the elementary level class, and this is not appropriate for you. And I think for a language like Turkish, it's very important that we are all starting from scratch together, because it does create a sense of shared camaraderie within that classroom environment.
right.
Uh, and one the other nice thing about about at least studying Turkish is the majority of our class was from the Middle East. So there was a young woman from Afghanistan, there was a young woman from Morocco, there was a doctoral student from Iran, and they're all bringing in their understanding of the language coming from Persian, coming from Arabic. Every once in a while, I'd contribute, oh, this actually comes from French. So you're getting, everyone's having their own point of entry within this language, which I found very exciting.
Yeah, when you take maybe a French class or a German class in a U.S. university, you might have a large number of people who are coming to that language from English. Whereas what you're saying, people coming from different linguistic backgrounds, probably is a more dynamic environment where you just get a lot more interesting inputs that stimulate the learning process in different ways.
it it simulates a learning process. It also, you want to talk to these people.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
they haven't lived you, and if you're trying to get these words out in Turkish, you're trying to. I actually want to know what you have to say about this,
Right.
and not to be too glib about my own classes and about German classes and stuff like that. It's just I have a sense of the world these people are coming from. Whereas my Turkish class, I had no idea what these people are up to, and I wanted to know. And I will say it was very sincere. And here we are 2 years later. Most of them were coming to my birthday party. Most of them were still hanging out. There was a really a beautiful sense of camaraderie within that classroom.
Yeah, I mean that's really a common story that I hear when it comes to these less commonly taught language classes. So I wanted to ask you, coming from the perspective of English, which I'm assuming is your native language, um, seems like it.
Otherwise, I'm very good.
um, what, as you in these past 2 years, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced with learning Turkish, and what did you find perhaps somewhat easy coming from your linguistic biography?
So, the two hardest things about French for me, and these are doozies. If you're looking at learning French, these are, for an English speaker, the big ones. The spelling is a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. It all has its own logic. I'm sure there are people screaming right now saying, no, it's fine. But no, no, no, no, no, no. I cannot defend French spelling. And the other is gender. French has two genders. Everything has a gender. Le, masculine, la, feminine. It really complicates, first of all, non-binary identity. And it also just makes memorization really difficult. It's one of the first things that people notice in France when you're messing up. If you're an English speaker, oh, you didn't get that gender right, because we just don't do that. And then in Turkish, completely phonetic. Because
Hmm.
Turkish is a relatively new language constructed in the 1920s, it's completely phonetic. If you can see the letter, you can speak the word. Everything you hear basically has one way to be spelled, and it makes your life worlds easier. And then the other thing is there's no gender. Everyone and everything is O. Now there's words for man and woman, boy and girl, but if there's no I'm sending it to him or her, it's I'm sending it to O. So that I found after French, where those were real problems for me. And I will say they're still real problems for me. Get my PhD in this language, and every once in a while I'm like, wait, what is the gender of a baguette? I'm not sure. But in Turkish, no, you don't have to deal with any of that. And in Turkish, the hardest part, and this is going to sound maybe a little silly, it's the words. French is full of cognates. It's when I'm teaching it, I can almost always create a link between the word I'm teaching my students and a word in English. And that almost never happens in Turkish. In Turkish, you have to create sort of false cognates whenever you can. At least that's what I do. An example would be the word for flexible in Turkish is esnek. And I thought that sounded like a snake. And I was like, well, snakes are really flexible. So that's how I got in there.
Okay. And then, I don't know much about Turkish, but it seems to me that words are kind of built out of many little parts. Is that right? And what is it like to learn that aspect of the language?
I find the suffix system in Turkish really fun. So a couple examples. The first one you might learn is siz. So that means that's without. In English, we might use the suffix less. So I'm trying to think of a good example. You'll see ücretsiz, without cost. You'll see şüphesiz, no doubt. You have all these different versions of siz. A complicated thing also when I do siz is that E in the middle there is part of what's called vowel harmony. Now that is probably the closest thing that Turkish gets to something like gender, in French gender, in terms of just like a distinction, a complication. But if you have a professor like Züleyha Hoca, you'll just really drill into that the first couple weeks and you'll build a reflex for it. It's a really easy thing to build a reflex for, if I'm being honest. I'm trying to think of another one. Here, let's just do gidiyorum. So gidiyorum is one word, which means I am going. So you have gitmek, which is the full infinitive of to go. İyor, which is the sort of ing. And then which means me. That's a pronoun suffix at the end there. So I hear it works the same in Spanish. I haven't quite tackled that one yet. But you don't really need to say the subject of a sentence within a sentence. You can just say, gidiyorum, I am going. So that's how you can kind of build out a word to suit your needs. I find it fun.
Yeah,
it's like Legos.
No, that's cool. So it's like Legos. Okay, nice. So I'm speaking to you right now from Istanbul, or you're in Istanbul. I'm in New York. And so you've had a chance now. I don't know how frequently you've traveled to Turkey in the last 2 years as you've been studying it, but I guess you're having a chance to speak Turkish with people, around you. And so I'm wondering, after 2 years of studying it at Columbia, how would you evaluate your own proficiency in the language?
So it's been 2 years at Columbia. This is my first time back to Turkey in 15 years. I'll say I did a Turkish intensive at the University of Pittsburgh last summer, the SLI, Summer Language Intensive. If you're looking at learning one of these less commonly spoken languages, that's actually a wonderful resource. You should check them out. But I did Turkish there last year. Right now, I'm doing okay. Being in the country is a very different thing. I'm able to chat with a cab driver. I'm able to order at a restaurant. I'm able to do all the normal things. I'm not quite at the level where I'm super comfortable saying that this is my dissertation topic. I'm hoping that that comes to me by the end of this summer when I do this intensive. But really, what I feel like is I have all of the pieces in front of me. I have studied most of the grammatical structure. I have a lot of basic vocabulary down. I need to get more specific vocabulary. And I think this time will be indispensable in terms of really making this grammatical vocabulary collection a little bit more useful.
Yeah, I mean, when you learn a language, you learn a language in a classroom, and it gives you the foundation, but you need to be in the area where that language is spoken to really consolidate and speak it, I guess, in a day-to-day kind of way.
Well, and then because you'll walk around, and I kept seeing this word, eczane, and somewhere in the back of my brain, I'm like, I know that one. I know that one. And you keep seeing it while you're walking around, eczane, eczane. And then finally, I saw somebody leave it with a back brace, and I was like, oh, it's a pharmacy.
Mm.
That's right. And now I'll never forget. Eczane means fire. There's something about being in the country that just locks things into place a bit better. And I tell my students there's two things I actually don't think I can recreate for you in this classroom. I know I can't recreate time. Ultimately, time is a factor. I can't recreate that here. It's going to take time. And the other thing I can't recreate is this immersive environment. We sometimes do our best. Zoya Hoja really did her best to do that for us, but really being put in a position where you are just surrounded by the language, where people are using it reflexively, you can't beat that, unfortunately.
Yeah, in my own language learning process, I learned Italian. I'm sure that I learned some words like for pharmacy or other words like that, maybe in the first semester or two, but perhaps I hadn't really known those words actively. But then when you're in the country, you have this kind of spatial memory. You have the embodied sense of like, oh, there's the pharmacy, and that's the word, and I can see the sign in my mind's eye. So that kind of gives you a real hook for your memory that maybe when you're just learning it in a classroom, you don't quite have it so solidly.
Well, that reminds me of when I was studying art history in undergrad, and I had the opportunity to go to Europe, and I saw the art, and it does lock in differently. When the Sistine Chapel isn't just a slide on your projector on the projection screen, when it's something you've been to, when you've committed to it like that, when you have experienced it like that, it locks in. It just locks in differently.
Yeah, yeah. So, you mentioned also that you took Ottoman Turkish. So you took spoken Turkish, I guess Turkish or Modern Turkish, and then you took
Mhm.
a class called Ottoman Turkish. Can you talk both about what that class is like and also why you decided to take that class?
Absolutely. So, uh, my I can speak a bit more of also the whole trajectory because when I started Turkish, I was saying to everybody, this is a hobby. I am not pursuing this seriously. I've always wanted to study a bit of Turkish. My best friend, we're still very close. She's going to visit me soon. We're still and so like I want to speak a bit of the language, but this is not going to be my dissertation. I'm going to keep things simple. And then I got the opportunity to go to Pittsburgh and do that uh, intensive. And after that, I thought to myself, well, now I'm committed. Uh, and I wasn't quite sure how to click it in, uh, but I knew I was probably going to need some sense of at least 19th century Ottoman on. And there's a course at Columbia, the Ottoman course. I really suggest it. It is a very different beast because Ottoman is a dead language. Dead languages have their own challenges, but they have a lot of benefits. And one of those benefits is I don't have to speak this language. I don't have to listen to this language. I mean, there are some very good Turkish playwrights and screenwriters who are placing things in the Ottoman Empire, so they might use more Ottoman dialogue. But largely speaking, no, no, no. You just have to read. The challenge is Ottoman is written using the Persian text. So that's the transition that happened. That's why modern Turkish is completely phonetic, because they adopted the Roman alphabet in the 1920s. Before the 1920s, it was the Persian script. That class under Didak Huja, who is absolutely wonderful, was very bespoke. Very bespoke. So the first semester, we all read the same book. I'm trying to, Kadın Hilesi. It was a Pickwick novel based in New York. On one side, and it was actually written by Zoe Hoca. One side of it was written in Ottoman, the other side in Modern Turkish. So you'd go back and forth. The second semester, you go to the professor and you say, I want to work on this, this, and this. And really, you are spending that time transcribing texts. And that's really when my dissertation topic came together, because all of a sudden we're reading these Ottoman texts. I'm like, this is all very interesting. This is all very useful. And I'm pretty sure nobody's used this before. So it seems like fair game. It's because it's so bespoke. And when I say bespoke, what I mean is there were some times where it was just me and one other student in the classroom with the professor.
Right.
This
so the
is
professor
basically, and also for my summer intensive in Pittsburgh, that entire 2-month period was me, the professor, and one other student.
Wow.
So you really can't beat that in a lot of ways when it comes to language learning in America. And it was a really conducive environment to building a repertoire of texts to use ultimately in either a dissertation, a thesis, or out of curiosity.
So, having learned Turkish, to what extent did that help you with Ottoman Turkish? And did that help, or are they just so different?
So if you go back far enough, Ottoman Turkish does become basically illegible to me. I remember our friend who's from Tehran, he looked at one of these old texts and he goes, oh, this is just Persian. So if you go back far enough, it does turn into that. But, and there's more Arabic loanwords used, more Farsi loanwords used. If you speak one of those two languages, you're in luck. But you really can't tackle it until you have a handle on Turkish. I actually think that you technically have to have gotten to the intermediate level to sign up for Ottoman Turkish. Otherwise, it would just be absolute gibberish to you. There are a lot more Arabic loanwords in Ottoman Turkish. There's a lot more Arabic loanwords, there's a lot more Persian loanwords, and those are challenging. But again, I'm not having a conversation with anybody. I can go to my dictionary. I can Google something. It's not so catastrophic. But if you are late enough, sort of pre-World War I Ottoman Turkish, it's pretty close to modern Turkish, just with the Persian script.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to put in the show notes a link to the webpage of the Turkish program at Columbia for anybody who might be interested in learning more about it, or maybe taking Turkish at Columbia either as a Columbia student or through one of the interinstitutional partnerships that Columbia has. So, Wesley, I wanted to thank you so much for speaking with me today about this incredible journey through French and Turkish from New York to Istanbul and wherever it is that you may be going for the rest of your time in Turkey.
Well, and thank you so much. And I'm going to head now to dinner with my professor from last summer. She's in Istanbul and she learned I was here and requested my presence for dinner tonight. So, yeah, it's just
Nice.
a really great time.
Nice. Sounds good. Thanks, Wesley.
Yeah. Thank you very much.